Welcome to our deep dive today
Okay.
into the world of brainwashing,
Uh-huh.
a topic that often evokes images of, secret government experiments and shadowy figures lurking in the dark.
Right.
But as we're about to uncover, the history of brainwashing is far more nuanced and far more unsettling than anything Hollywood could conjure up.
Yeah, it goes way back.
It does. It goes way back.
Yeah.
And we'll be tracing its roots back centuries, exploring its evolution through religious fervor,
Yes.
Cold War paranoia, and even into our modern age,
Absolutely.
where technology and information overload present new and perhaps even more insidious avenues for manipulation.
Yeah, I think the tools have always been there,
Right.
but they've been sort of repurposed and refined throughout history for
For different ends. So to guide us on this journey, we have with us an expert in the field, someone who's delved into the dark underbelly of brainwashing and emerged with fascinating insights.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So let's start by dispelling a common misconception right off the bat.
Okay.
The term brainwashing itself might seem relatively recent, like something out of a 1950s Cold War propaganda film.
Right.
But the methods employed to influence beliefs and compel obedience
Yeah.
have been around for centuries.
Yeah, the techniques themselves are ancient.
Can you give us an example of these techniques being used before the term brainwashing even existed?
Well, one striking example is the Spanish Inquisition.
Wow.
Yeah, they were notorious for using isolation, sleep deprivation, and threats to extract confessions from those accused of heresy.
Those tactics sound brutal and more than a little unethical.
Absolutely. And yet they were effective. The Tsarist Okhrana, the Russian secret police, actually observed that individuals subjected to this kind of duress became highly susceptible to suggestion.
It's almost like breaking someone down to build them back up in a desired mold.
Exactly. When you deprive someone of sleep, disorient them with isolation, their ability to think critically diminishes, their anxieties heighten, and they become prime targets for manipulation.
So it's a twisted form of conversion.
You could say that there are certainly parallels between these coercive tactics and religious conversion. Both often target individuals in vulnerable states, apply intense group pressure, and offer a vision of redemption or rebirth.
It makes sense. When someone is going through a difficult time or questioning their beliefs, they're more likely to cling to a group or ideology that promises solace and a sense of belonging.
Right. Think of someone like John Wesley, the 18th century preacher. His sermons were renowned for eliciting powerful emotional responses from his audiences, leading to profound changes in their convictions and actions.
I read accounts of people weeping, fainting, even claiming to experience divine visions during his sermons. He certainly had a way with words.
It's absolutely. Wesley understood the power of emotional rhetoric to sway hearts and minds.
Now let's jump ahead to the early 20th century, a time of immense scientific advancements, but also a time when those advancements sometimes took a dark turn.
Okay.
Enter Ivan Pavlov, the Russian physiologist famous for his experiments with dogs.
Yes, Pavlov's dogs.
Precisely. Ring a bell. The dog salivates, repeat. Classic conditioning. But how does this seemingly innocuous research connect to brainwashing?
Well, Pavlov's work on conditioned reflexes in animals was unfortunately often misinterpreted and even distorted to support the idea that human behavior could be molded and controlled in a similar manner.
So instead of bells and food, you could substitute propaganda and rewards, or even punishments.
Exactly. And this interpretation of Pavlov's findings dovetailed perfectly with the ambitions of the Soviet regime under Stalin.
Ah, yes, the Soviets, they took this concept of conditioning and I'd say weaponized it.
Yes. The Soviet show trials of the 1930s are a chilling example. Forced confessions played a crucial role in solidifying Stalin's power, and these confessions were often obtained through a calculated system of psychological and physical torture.
I recall reading about Nikolai Bukharin, a prominent Bolshevik who fell victim to these show trials. He endured sleep deprivation threats against his family, relentless interrogation, until he finally broke and confessed to crimes he didn't commit.
It's a heartbreaking example of how these manipulative techniques can distort a person's reality and force them to betray their own principles.
So we've gone from impassioned sermons to state-sanctioned terror, all in the name of shaping beliefs and behavior. It seems the 20th century had a penchant for taking these age-old methods of coercion and amplifying them to horrifying levels.
You're absolutely right. And as we move further into the 20th century, we'll see how this obsession with controlling minds takes even stranger and more unsettling turns. But first, let's delve into a chapter that sounds like something straight out of a spy film, truth serums.
Truth serums.
Yes.
This is where it starts to feel like a Cold War thriller. Did those actually exist?
They did, and their use was far more complex and controversial than Hollywood might depict. Drugs like scopolamine and sodium amytal, initially used in medical settings for treating psychiatric conditions, were soon being considered for interrogation and information extraction.
So from healing to potential weaponization, that's quite a shift. Were they effective at unearthing the truth?
Even back then, the effectiveness of these so-called truth serums was hotly debated. Some believed they simply lowered inhibitions, causing people to talk more freely, but not necessarily truthfully. Others claim they could unlock deep-seated secrets, compelling a subject to divulge information against their will.
Sounds like a recipe for false confessions and unreliable intelligence.
Exactly. There was a famous case involving Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy, who suffered from amnesia after flying to Scotland during World War II. He was given sodium amytal in an attempt to restore his memory, but it yielded no valuable information.
So much for the magical truth serum.
Indeed, this brings us to a pivotal moment in the history of brainwashing the Cold War. The perplexing behavior of American POWs during the Korean War fueled widespread fear and paranoia about communist mind control techniques.
Ah, yes, the brainwashing panic. It felt like something ripped from a propaganda film. What exactly sparked this fear?
The term brainwashing itself was popularized by journalist Edward Hunter. It captured the public's imagination and anxieties about communist infiltration and the terrifying prospect of anyone being turned into an agent of the enemy.
There were accounts of American soldiers signing propaganda petitions denouncing the United States, even choosing to stay in China after the war. It must have seemed like undeniable proof that the communists possessed some sort of mind control weapon.
The reality of the POW experience, however, was far more complex. Many soldiers endured horrific conditions in the camps: starvation, disease, relentless psychological pressure. It's incredibly difficult to distinguish genuine conversion from coerced compliance in such extreme situations.
So were they brainwashed, or were they simply doing whatever it took to survive? It seems almost impossible to know for sure.
That ambiguity is what makes this topic so fascinating and so unsettling. It forces us to confront fundamental questions about the nature of belief, the limits of human resilience, and the chilling potential for manipulation.
If the Cold War brought brainwashing to the forefront of public consciousness, didn't it also lead to some rather questionable experiments right here in the U.S.?
It certainly did. Enter Project MKUltra, the CIA's clandestine program dedicated to exploring mind control and manipulation techniques. It represents a dark chapter in American history marked by ethical violations and a relentless pursuit of a weapon that may not have even been attainable.
MKUltra, that name alone sends shivers down my spine. Weren't they secretly dosing people with LSD?
That was one of the more disturbing aspects of MKUltra. They experimented with a variety of substances, including LSD, often on unwitting subjects, in a quest to find ways to control behavior, extract information, or even create programmable assassins.
It sounds like a paranoid fantasy gone horribly wrong.
A tragic incident involving Dr. Frank Olson, a CIA scientist who was unknowingly given LSD and later died under mysterious circumstances, whether it was an accident or something more sinister. Olson's death cast a long shadow over MKUltra, exposing the program's recklessness and disregard for human life.
It's hard to imagine any ethical justification for such experiments.
The pursuit of knowledge can lead to dangerous places, and MKUltra serves as a stark reminder of that. Despite its vast scope and funding, the program ultimately failed to achieve its lofty goals of cracking the code of mind control.
That's somewhat reassuring, I suppose. But MKUltra wasn't the only example of ethically dubious research in this area, was it?
No, it wasn't. Dr. Ewan Cameron's experiments with psychic driving in the 1950s and 60s stand as another disturbing example.
Psychic driving. What was that all about?
Cameron believed he could erase and reprogram memories, essentially wiping the slate clean and constructing a new personality. His methods involved intensive electroshock therapy, drug-induced comas, and prolonged exposure to repetitive audio recordings. It was a highly controversial approach with devastating consequences for many of his patients.
We have secret CIA programs, rogue scientists experimenting on vulnerable individuals. Is there a common thread running through all of this?
What we see is a dangerous convergence of scientific ambition, Cold War paranoia, and a profound lack of ethical oversight. These elements created an environment where the pursuit of control over the human mind became an obsession, often with tragic results.
It's a sobering reminder that science, for all its potential for good, can be easily twisted and abused. And in the case of brainwashing, the line between legitimate inquiry and harmful manipulation was often blurred beyond recognition.
Exactly. And as we delve further into the latter half of the 20th century, we'll see how the concept of brainwashing moved beyond government programs and infiltrated popular culture, influencing everything from criminal trials to our understanding of cults and hostage situations.
Well, I'm definitely eager to see where this exploration takes us. Let's continue our journey into the labyrinth of the human mind and see what other unsettling truths we uncover.
Let's do it. So now let's transition to a phenomenon that
Okay.
emerged in the 1970s
All
that
right.
really captured the public's attention and raised a lot of questions about the complexities of hostage situations and how trauma can really...
Affect people's behavior.
You're talking about Stockholm Syndrome, right?
Exactly, Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah, we touched upon this briefly earlier when we were discussing Patty Hearst.
Right.
But for those who may not be familiar, can you give us a quick rundown of what Stockholm Syndrome is and how it came to be?
Of course. So, the term Stockholm Syndrome originates from a bank robbery that took place in Stockholm, Sweden, back in 1973.
Oh, wow.
A robber named Jan Erik Olsen took 4 bank employees hostage and held them captive for 6 days
6 days inside a bank.
inside a bank vault.
Oh my gosh.
It was a very intense situation.
Yeah, I can only imagine the fear and anxiety those hostages must have experienced.
Absolutely. It was a harrowing ordeal for them.
Yeah,
But what happened next was what really surprised everyone.
okay.
Instead of feeling anger or resentment towards their captor, the hostages started to develop feelings of empathy and even sympathy for him.
Wait, they develop feelings for the person who was holding them hostage.
Yes, it seems counterintuitive, right?
It's very strange. It is, and that's precisely why it fascinated psychologists and law enforcement officials alike. They coined the term Stockholm Syndrome to describe this unusual phenomenon where hostages form a psychological bond with their captor, sometimes even defending them and resisting rescue attempts.
That's incredible. So what are some of the theories behind why this happens?
Well, one theory is that it's a survival mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in a situation where your life depends on someone else, you become hyper aware of their every move, and any act of kindness or perceived empathy can take on huge significance.
It's like clinging to any shred of hope in a terrifying and unpredictable situation.
Exactly. And in some cases, this bond can become so strong that even after being released, hostages continue to defend their captors, refuse to testify against them, and even visit them in prison.
That's wild. So how does Stockholm Syndrome complicate things when we're trying to understand cases like Patty Hearst or the American POWs in Korea, where there's a question of whether someone was genuinely brainwashed or simply acting under duress?
It adds another layer of complexity to the whole issue of coercion and free will. Because if someone can develop genuine feelings for their captor, even in a hostage situation, then how can we be certain that someone who's been subjected to intense indoctrination hasn't truly embraced those beliefs, even if it was initially a matter of survival?
It makes it almost impossible to draw a clear line between genuine conversion and coerced compliance.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole topic so challenging and so fascinating.
It really does force us to grapple with some uncomfortable questions about the nature of belief, the malleability of the human mind, and the insidious ways that manipulation can work.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of manipulation and the darker side of human nature,
Yeah.
I think it's time we address the Jonestown Massacre.
Oh, yes, the Jonestown Massacre. It's a horrifying example of what can happen when a charismatic leader gains absolute control over a group of people.
It truly is a chilling testament to the dangers of blind faith, unchecked authority, and the seductive allure of someone who promises salvation while demanding complete obedience.
Jim Jones, the leader of the People's Temple, was a master manipulator, wasn't he?
He was incredibly charismatic and persuasive. He initially drew people in with messages of social justice, equality, and a vision of a utopian community.
Yeah, he attracted a diverse following, people from all walks of life who were seeking a sense of belonging and purpose.
But beneath that veneer of benevolence
Right.
lurked a dark and controlling personality.
Yeah, he gradually isolated his followers from the outside world, demanded absolute loyalty, and instilled a culture of fear and paranoia.
You're absolutely right. He convinced them that the outside world was evil and that only he could protect them. He controlled every aspect of their lives, their finances, their relationships, even their thoughts.
And it culminated in that horrific mass suicide in 1978, where over 900 people, including Jones himself, died by drinking cyanide-laced Flavor Aid.
It's a tragedy that still haunts us today, a stark reminder of the power of persuasive leaders to lead people down a path of destruction.
What's particularly unsettling is that many of those who died weren't necessarily forced to do so. They willingly participated in the suicide.
Yes, and that's what makes Jonestown such a disturbing case study in the psychology of cults and brainwashing. Jones was able to completely warp his followers' reality, convince them that death was the only way to escape the evils of the world.
It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of groupthink, the importance of critical thinking, and the need to be wary of anyone who demands unquestioning obedience.
Absolutely. Now, from the tragedy of Jonestown, let's shift our focus to another group that seemed to defy logic and embrace beliefs that many would consider delusional.
Okay, you're talking about Heaven's Gate.
Yes, Heaven's Gate.
The Heaven's Gate cult, with their bizarre beliefs about alien spaceships and the need to shed their earthly bodies to ascend to a higher plane of existence.
It's a fascinating and unsettling case that demonstrates the enduring power of belief systems, even in the face of seemingly irrefutable evidence to the contrary.
I remember when the news of their mass suicide broke in 1997. It was shocking. 39 people, all dressed in matching black tracksuits and Nike sneakers, took their own lives in a mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California. They believed that by leaving their physical bodies, they could rendezvous with an alien spacecraft trailing the Hale-Bopp comet.
Their belief system was a unique blend of New Age spirituality, Christian millennialism, and science fiction, all filtered through the lens of their leaders, Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles.
Applewhite and Nettles, or Dew and Ty, as they call themselves, preached they were extraterrestrial beings sent to Earth to prepare a select group for ascension to a higher realm.
And they demanded absolute obedience from their followers, urging them to sever ties with their families, renounce material possessions, and adopt a strict lifestyle of celibacy, self-denial, and ritualistic practices.
And in the end, they convinced their followers that the only way to achieve true enlightenment and escape Earth's impending doom was to commit suicide and join that alien spacecraft.
It's a tragedy that highlights the power of belief systems to shape our perceptions, even when those beliefs are demonstrably false or lead to self-destruction.
It's a stark reminder that the human mind is incredibly adept at finding patterns, creating narratives, and constructing meaning, even where none exists.
And when those narratives become intertwined with our sense of identity, our purpose, our longing for something greater, it can be incredibly difficult to break free from their grip.
So how do we protect ourselves from falling prey to such extreme belief systems? How can we differentiate between healthy skepticism and dangerous delusion?
That's a question that has plagued philosophers and psychologists for centuries. There's no easy answer. But I think cultivating a mindset of critical thinking, questioning assumptions, seeking out diverse perspectives, and being open to changing our minds when presented with new evidence is crucial.
It's like we need to develop a sort of mental immune system to protect ourselves from the constant bombardment of information and misinformation that we encounter every day.
Exactly. We need to be discerning consumers of information, to question the narratives that are presented to us, and to be wary of anyone who claims to have all the answers or demands unquestioning loyalty.
Well said. So we've delved into some pretty dark territory here. The horrors of Jonestown, the bizarre beliefs of Heaven's Gate. But hasn't the 20th century also provided us with some valuable insights into the resilience of the human spirit, our capacity for compassion, and our ability to overcome even the most daunting challenges?
Absolutely. For every story of manipulation and exploitation, there are countless stories of courage, resilience, and the triumph of the human spirit.
Think of Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the horrors of Auschwitz and went on to write, "Man's Search for Meaning, a testament to the enduring power of hope and our ability to find meaning even in the face of suffering."
Frankel's experience and the experiences of countless others who have endured trauma and adversity show us that the human spirit has an incredible capacity to withstand unimaginable hardship and come out stronger on the other side.
It's a reminder that even when confronted with darkness, there was always hope, always the potential for growth, always the possibility of finding meaning and purpose.
And it's that indomitable spirit, that capacity for resilience and compassion that ultimately gives me hope for humanity's future, even as we navigate the ever-present challenges of manipulation, persuasion, and the battle for control over our minds.
That's a heartening thought.
Yeah.
It seems the study of brainwashing is ultimately a study of the human condition itself, with all its complexities and contradictions.
Absolutely. It's a journey into those dark corners, but also, highlights the strength
Yeah.
of the human spirit.
So speaking of journeys into the darker aspects of the human psyche,
Right.
let's circle back to a case that really blurred the lines between Stockholm Syndrome and deliberate indoctrination.
Okay.
Patty Hearst and her experience with the Symbionese Liberation Army.
Yeah.
It's a story that gripped the world back in the 1970s, and continues to spark debate about the nature of coercion, free will, and the very definition of brainwashing. So for those who might not be as familiar with this case, can you give us a little background on who Patty Hearst was and what happened to her?
Sure. So Patricia Hearst was the granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst.
The media mogul.
The media mogul, exactly. She was a 19-year-old college student
Wow.
when she was kidnapped from her apartment in Berkeley, California in 1974
By the SLA.
by the Symbionese Liberation Army, a small but very vocal radical group with a violent anti-establishment ideology.
It was a huge story at the time.
Wow.
This heiress to a media empire being abducted by a group of revolutionaries.
It was a media sensation. The SLA initially demanded a ransom,
Okay.
but their goals seemed to extend far beyond just money. They wanted to use Hearst as a pawn in their revolutionary game.
And they certainly got the world's attention.
They did. They released audio tapes and photos of Hearst documenting her apparent transformation from captive to willing participant in their activities.
It was pretty shocking to see her denouncing her family, embracing the SLA's ideology, even taking part in a bank robbery with
Well,
them.
it was a radical shift.
Yeah. So the big question was she truly brainwashed? Or was she a willing convert to the SLA's cause?
It was a question that captivated the nation and ignited a fierce debate that extended into the courtroom.
During her trial, the prosecution argued that she was a willing participant in the SLA's crimes,
Right.
that she had chosen to align herself with their cause.
But the defense countered,
Yeah.
arguing that she was a victim of intense coercion.
Right.
They claimed that she had been subjected to prolonged isolation, sensory deprivation, physical and psychological abuse, and relentless ideological indoctrination.
Essentially that the SLA had broken her down and forced her to comply with their demands.
Exactly. The trial became a battleground for experts in psychology and psychiatry, each side presenting their own interpretation of the evidence.
It was a high-stakes legal drama that really forced the public to grapple with the complexities of brainwashing, coercion, and the limits of human resilience.
It did. And in the end, the jury found Hearst guilty of bank robbery.
She was sentenced to prison, but her sentence was later commuted, and she was eventually pardoned.
That's right. But the question of whether she was genuinely brainwashed or a willing collaborator continues to be debated.
It's a case that really highlights the difficulty of disentangling the threads of coercion, free will, and the human mind's capacity for both extraordinary strength and vulnerability.
It does. And it underscores the enduring relevance of the brainwashing concept, whether we call it coercive persuasion, thought reform, or mind control. The potential for individuals and groups to manipulate and exploit others for their own ends is a reality we can't ignore.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of brainwashing, what are some of the key takeaways that we should keep in mind?
Well, despite all the unsettling examples we've discussed, it's important to remember that the human mind is also capable of incredible resilience, adaptability, and compassion. For every instance of manipulation and exploitation, there are countless stories of individuals who resisted coercion, overcame adversity, and maintained their integrity in the face of immense pressure.
It's a good reminder that even in the darkest of circumstances, the human spirit can find a way to persevere and even thrive.
Absolutely. And I think that's ultimately what gives me hope, even as we navigate the complexities of persuasion manipulation and the ongoing struggle for control over our minds. The human capacity for good, for resilience, for compassion shines through.
Well said. So as we conclude our exploration of brainwashing, let's hold on to that sense of hope while remaining vigilant and aware of the potential for manipulation that exists in our world.
I think that's a great way to put it.
It's been a fascinating and thought-provoking journey, and I want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us today.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of brainwashing. We hope you found it enlightening and perhaps even a little bit unsettling. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp.